The salt cellar was the first omen. As my wife Elizabeth placed the heavy, dark ceramic piece between the pepper mill and the vase of ranunculus, it looked like a tombstone on our elegant table. It was from Maine, she always said. A weekend trip before we met. It's grounding, she'd claim with that faint, unreadable smile. Tonight, it felt like an anchor dragging us both down. The dinner was Caleb's idea, a celebration of my promotion to senior partner. Elizabeth had orchestrated everything: slow-roasted duck, dauphinoise potatoes, the good burgundy. Our friend Stella and her fiancé were there, along with Caleb, all laughter and warm light. Elizabeth was radiant, but I saw the careful precision in her movements. She was performing. When Caleb brought up law school and that girl from my constitutional law class, I felt the temperature drop. "Eleanor," I said, too casually. "Ancient history." Elizabeth set her wine glass down with a click that silenced the room. She looked at our guests, her smile serene and terrifying. "James's ex," she said, her voice clear as ice, "will always be part of his life. A part of him. If you can't accept that, all of it, the history, the weight of it, then you shouldn't marry me." Stella's fork froze mid-air. Caleb's grin melted. I stared at my wife, this stranger in her skin. That dinner was the last coherent memory I had of our life before it fractured. Her declaration wasn't a random comment, it was a test. A line drawn in the sand of our dining room floor. And I had failed it completely, arguing about a college girlfriend while she was trying to tell me something monstrous about herself. For 3 days afterward, she moved through our home like a ghost haunting her own life. She'd stare out windows, her coffee growing cold. She'd start sentences and trail off. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched as if burned. I asked her a dozen times what was wrong, and she gave me a dozen variations of, "I'm just tired." But her eyes were screaming. Then I woke to a silence so complete it felt violent. Her side of the bed was cold, the sheets smooth as if no one had ever slept there. The house held its breath. I found the note on the kitchen island, anchored by that damned salt cellar. "James. I have to go. I can't carry it anymore, and I can't watch you try to carry it for me. I'm so sorry. Don't look for me. Just live. E." The detective who came 2 days later was named Parker, a woman with tired eyes and a voice that held no inflection. She moved through our home like a curator in a museum of normalcy. "The note is clear, Mr. Arden. She left voluntarily. There's no sign of foul play. We'll file the report, but our resources are for people in actual danger. She is in danger." I heard myself shout, the sound alien in my own living room. "From whatever it is." "From herself, maybe," Parker said, her pity worse than dismissal. She left me with a case number and the unshakable sense that in the eyes of the world, my wife had simply chosen to stop being mine. That's when I understood, if anyone was going to find her, it would have to be me. Not to bring her back, she'd made that choice clear enough, but to understand what had broken. To learn what it was that weighed so heavily that it crushed a 12-year marriage. I just never imagined that the search would lead me to discover that the woman I loved was a carefully constructed fiction, and that the truth had been buried with 2 people I never knew existed. The investigation began where all modern quests do, in the sock drawer. Not mine, hers. I started methodically, room by room, trying to find a clue that wasn't meant to be found. It felt like a violation, but desperation erodes ethics. I found birthday cards I'd given her, saved theater stubs, the normal ephemera of a shared life. Nothing that explained her exit. It was on the 3rd day of searching, beneath a stack of winter woolens in the back of her drawer, that I found it. Taped to the back of our honeymoon photo, the one from Santorini where we're both squinting into the sun, laughing, was a small, tarnished brass key. On the photo's back, her handwriting, "If you're looking here, you didn't listen. But you never did know when to stop. 12 to 14. Our bank. Box 12 to 14. The vault room at the bank was a cold, humming space, smelling of old paper and chilled metal. The manager, a man named Robert who'd helped us with our mortgage, slid the long metal box toward me with polite indifference that couldn't quite mask his curiosity. When the lid lifted, the overhead fluorescent light gleamed on 3 artifacts of a life I hadn't known my wife lived. They were arranged with neat, painful care. First, a man's platinum wedding band, scratched and dulled with time. It was simpler than mine, narrower. I picked it up. It was cold, and so light in my palm it felt like it might vanish. Second, a police report from Burlington, Vermont, dated 15 years ago. The paper was crisp, the typewriter font official and brutal. Single vehicle accident. Driver, Michael Vale, 24. Deceased at scene. Passenger, Elizabeth Shaw, 19. Critical condition. Suspected cause, black ice. Third, a marriage certificate. Elizabeth Shaw to Michael Vale. Date, 6 months before the accident. Michael Vale. Not Shaw. She'd been married. Widowed at 19. I sat there in the hard chair, the hum of the vault a low drone in my ears, and tried to reconcile the woman I knew with this girl in a police report. The dates lined up. She was 19. A teenager. A wife. A widow. I felt the ground of my own history with her liquefy. Our meeting in a graduate school library, our first date at that terrible Italian place, our wedding under the oak tree at her aunt's house, all of it was built on ground that had already been consecrated by a tragedy I knew nothing about. Stella helped me find the rest online late that night in my kitchen, the blue light of her laptop casting ghostly shadows. Obituaries. A memorial scholarship fund at a Vermont high school. Michael Vale, graduate student in environmental law, beloved son, devoted husband. The accident happened on Route 7. A tree. His wife Elizabeth survived with traumatic injuries. No mention of pregnancy, but the dates in the journal I would soon find told that darker story. That truth came 2 days later, when desperation made me ruthless. I pulled our bedroom apart. I took books off shelves, felt under drawers, tapped walls for hollow sounds. I found it hidden beneath a false bottom in her jewelry box, a compartment so well made I would have missed it if not for a tiny scratch on the rosewood. Inside was a slender, leather-bound journal. The pages were warped in places, the paper buckled in waves from what could only have been tears. The first entry I saw was written in a frantic, sloping hand. They said I lost the baby today. Like I misplaced my keys. Like it wasn't the only part of Michael left in this world. They said fetal demise and trauma-induced miscarriage, and I wanted to scream that she had a name. We decided on Eleanor. Eleanor Rebecca Vale. After his mother and mine. Now she's just products of conception on some chart. I am a cemetery. I hold a husband and a daughter inside me, and no one sees the ghosts. I read the entries through trembling hands, sitting on the floor of our walk-in closet surrounded by her clothes that still smelled of her. The grueling recovery, multiple surgeries, skin grafts, learning to walk again. The move to Portland to live with Michael's aunt. The crushing, cyclical guilt that bled from every line, he was driving fast to get me medicine. For morning sickness. I was crying because I couldn't keep water down. I killed him. I killed them both. The final entry, dated a year before we met, was written in a calmer, resolved script that was somehow worse. I will never speak of this again. To speak it is to make it real for someone else, and I cannot do that to another human being. I will build a new life on top of this grave. I will be someone else. Elizabeth Shaw, orphan, librarian. Simple. Clean. Empty. The other Elizabeth, the one who was a wife, a mother, she died in that car too. I have to let her be dead. She hadn't just lost a husband. She'd lost an entire future, an entire self. The ex she referenced at dinner wasn't a past lover, it was a dead husband. A ghost family. The weight was 2 graves she visited every day in her mind while she made coffee in our kitchen, while she laughed at my jokes, while she lay beside me in the dark. I booked a flight to Burlington the next morning. The rental car smelled of pine air freshener and stale coffee. The accident site was just outside town, a bend in a country road marked by a dark, lasting scar on an old maple tree. Bark had grown back around the wound, but the shape of the impact remained, a twisted knot in the wood. I stood there in the drizzling cold, hands in my pockets, trying to imagine the impact, the shattering glass, the deafening silence afterward. A young woman pulled from wreckage, already a widow, already losing the child she carried. The rain misted my glasses. I thought of her waking up in a hospital, her body broken, her future erased. The sheer loneliness of it was an abyss I couldn't look into for long. At the local library, a helpful archivist pulled microfiche of the local paper. I found Michael Vale's obituary, and a small article about the scholarship fund. On a whim, I asked about his thesis. It was in the university archives. I held the bound paper in my hands, turning to the dedication page, for E, my North Star and my compass. Always. My throat closed. He'd loved her. Deeply. This wasn't a fling, it was a marriage. A planned child. A life. At the county clerk's office, a sympathetic older woman named Janet with cat-eye glasses found the death certificate. As she handed me the copy, she said quietly, "Such a tragedy. Sweet boy. His parents, they never recovered. You know they set up a scholarship at the high school. Still give it every year." The thought jolted me. Elizabeth had mentioned her parents died in a car crash when she was in college, another half-truth, I now realized. She'd never mentioned his parents. Were they alive? Did they know where she was? Did they blame her? Janet gave me an address, 20 miles out of town. A colonial house with a well-kept garden and, poignantly, a basketball hoop still mounted over the garage. Carol Vale answered the door. She was in her late 60s, with kind, tired eyes and hair the color of brushed steel. And she had Elizabeth's eyes, the same shape, the same deep green, the same sadness etched deeper by time. "I'm a friend of Elizabeth's," I said, my throat tight. "From college. I'm trying to reach her. It's important." The name transformed her face. Pain, then a flicker of warmth, then deep concern. "Beth? Is she all right? We haven't seen her in years." "Not since, well." She stepped back, holding the door open. "Please, come in." The living room was a gentle shrine to a son frozen at 24. Photos covered the mantel and walls, Michael graduating, Michael hiking, Michael smiling with his arm around a young Elizabeth at what looked like a picnic. In that photo, Elizabeth looked back at the camera with a radiant, unguarded joy I had never seen on her face. It was the look of someone who felt utterly safe, utterly loved. "We loved her like a daughter," Carol said, handing me a mug of tea. Her hands trembled slightly. After the accident, she was in the hospital for 3 months. We visited every day. We held her hand while she slept. We read to her. Then, when she was physically healed enough, she just disappeared. Went to her aunt's in Portland. We wrote. She never replied. We called. The number was disconnected. We understood, in a way. The grief, sometimes it needs to be carried alone. It's too big to share. "Did you know," I began, then stopped, sipping the too hot tea to buy a second. "Did you know about the baby?" Carol Vale's cup rattled violently in its saucer. Tea sloshed over the rim. Tears welled in her eyes instantly, spilling over. "She told you," she whispered. "I found her journal." She nodded, setting the cup down and pressing a knuckle to her mouth. She took a steadying breath. She was 12 weeks. We'd just started planning the nursery. She was so sick, poor thing. That's why Michael was out. She trailed off, composed herself. After the miscarriage, something in her shut down. The doctor called it traumatic dissociation. She built a wall between before and after. By the time she left the hospital, she'd already begun to become someone else. Someone who hadn't been a wife. A mother. Someone who could breathe without it hurting. She rose and went to a writing desk, returning with a cardboard box. Inside were letters, maybe 2 dozen, all unopened, all in Elizabeth's handwriting. Return to sender. Every year on the anniversary, Carol said, her voice thick. I send her a card. Just to say we remember him too. That we remember her. She always sends them back. Did she ever talk about guilt? I asked, the journal entry burning in my mind. About blaming herself? Carol's expression shattered completely. She covered her face with her hands for a moment, her shoulders shaking. When she lowered them, her composure was gone, replaced by raw maternal anguish. Every day. Every single day in that hospital room. I asked for the crackers. I made him go out. It's my fault. We told her, we screamed at her, it was an accident. Black ice. A patch no one could have seen. It could have happened to anyone. She stopped hearing us. She built the guilt into the wall too. It became part of the foundation of whatever new person she was building. I drove back to the airport with a shoebox on the passenger seat, photos Carol had insisted I take. Michael and Elizabeth at a fall picnic, blanket spread, him pointing at something in the distance, her laughing. On a ski trip, faces rosy. In a silly photo booth strip, making grotesque faces, then kissing in the last frame. A whole life. A love story with a catastrophic, senseless ending. I understood now why she'd kept the salt cellar. It wasn't from Maine. Michael had probably bought it for her at a craft fair in Vermont. It was the last mundane, beautiful thing from that other life. When I showed Caleb and Stella the photos and the journal that night, Stella cried silently, and Caleb just stared at the wall, his jaw working. It's not just grief, Stella said finally, staring at the photo of a beaming Elizabeth, maybe 20, her head resting on Michael's shoulder. It's identity theft. She stole a self from herself. You fell in love with a performance, James. And the performer was exhausted. The letters I wrote to her P.O. box changed after that. I stopped asking her to come home. I started describing what I'd seen. I wrote about the bend in the road, the rain, the scar on the maple tree. About Janet at the clerk's office and her cat-eye glasses. About Carol's eyes that looked just like hers. I transcribed the thesis dedication. You were someone's North Star. That doesn't disappear because the sky went dark. It just means the navigation is harder, the stars you steer by are memories. Let me be your compass now. Not to replace him. To help you carry the map that includes him. I mailed one every week. The silence that followed was a physical presence in the house. I went to work. I met Caleb for drinks. I pretended to be a person living a life. But I was just waiting. 6 weeks to the day after my trip to Vermont, on a rainy Tuesday evening that smelled of wet earth and decay, the doorbell rang. She stood on the porch, illuminated by the yellow porch light, drenched. A small, worn duffel bag sat at her feet like a tired dog. She was thinner, her cheekbones sharp under skin that looked translucent. Her auburn hair, usually so carefully styled, was longer, tangled, plastered to her neck by the rain. She looked at me, a long, searching look, then passed me into the warm, lit hallway of the home she'd fled. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just held the door open, an invitation without pressure, a space for her to choose. For a long minute, we stood there in the drumming rain, the space between us charged with all the unsaid years, all the discovered pain, the ghost of a man and a child hovering in the mist. You went to Vermont, she said, her voice raspy from disuse or tears or both. Yes. You met Carol. Yes. A tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the rainwater on her cheek. She must hate me. She loves you. She has a box of letters you returned. She still sends a card every year. Elizabeth broke then, a shudder that went through her whole body, a silent quake. She crossed the threshold, her wet shoes leaving dark prints on the hardwood. She dropped her bag with a thud. She didn't hug me. She walked past me, into the living room, her gaze sweeping over the familiar space as if seeing it for the first time. Then she went to the bookshelf, to the poetry section, and pulled out a well-worn volume of Mary Oliver. From between the pages of The Journey, she withdrew a faded photograph, the exact same fall picnic photo Carol had given me. I look at this every day, she whispered, her back to me. And every day, I put it away and pretend I don't. I didn't touch her. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, clicked on the gas. The ordinary sounds were a lifeline. The whistle of the kettle, the clink of ceramic, the pour of steaming water, a ritual of normalcy. When I returned with 2 mugs, she was sitting on the floor, her back against the sofa, the photo in her lap. She'd taken off her wet coat. She looked small, drowned. I was 3 months pregnant, she said, not to me, but to the room, to the ghosts. I had morning sickness so bad I couldn't keep water down for 2 days. I was hysterical, convinced something was wrong with the baby. I wanted these specific ginger crackers from the health food store across town. He said he'd be right back. He kissed my forehead. He was smiling. She swallowed, her throat working. There was black ice on the bridge. They told me he died instantly. They told me that to comfort me. She finally looked at me, her eyes ancient, haunted. My body held on to her for 6 more days. As if it didn't know the world had ended. As if my cells didn't get the memo. When I finally lost her. I remember thinking, good. Now she won't have to grow up in the wreckage of me. That's not wreckage, I said, my voice thick, setting her tea on the floor beside her. That's survival. That's all it ever was. I built this life with you, she gestured vaguely around the room, on top of their grave. I thought if I was perfect enough, the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the perfect, quiet librarian, I could make the ground solid. I could pave over it. But graves settle. The earth shifts. And that night, at that dinner, with everyone laughing, I felt the ground crack open under my feet. I was going to fall in. I had to say something true or I was going to suffocate on the lie. So you talked about my ex-girlfriend. It was the only door I could open, she said, a faint, bitter smile touching her lips. A door to a room you knew existed. To show you I had other rooms, rooms I'd never shown you, rooms full of this. She looked down at the photo. When you didn't understand, when you just argued about Eleanor. I thought, that's it. He can't live in a house with ghosts. The foundation can't hold. So I had to leave before you saw them. Before you had to live with them too. I see them now, I said, sitting on the floor across from her, not touching, leaving a canyon of space between us for the truth to breathe. Michael. Eleanor. I don't know them, but I know they were loved. That they are loved. By you. That doesn't scare me, Elizabeth. What scares me is the thought of you in a motel room somewhere, carrying them alone. What scares me is you thinking you have to. She drew her knees to her chest, resting her forehead on them, curling into a protective ball. Her voice was muffled. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to let someone help me carry it. I've been carrying it for so long, it feels like part of my skeleton. You don't stop, I said softly. You just, make room. You let me sit with you in the room where you keep them. You tell me about the ginger crackers. About his laugh. About whether he snored. About the names you picked out. You let them be part of our life, not a secret buried beneath it. The weight doesn't get lighter. It just gets distributed. It hurts, she whispered, a raw confession. I know. It will always hurt. I know that, too. She lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, puffy, but clearer than I'd seen them in years. The constant, low-level fog of dissociation had lifted, leaving stark, painful clarity. The safe deposit box. There are more letters. At the bottom, under the lining. Letters to Carol. Apologies I could never send. Letters to Michael. To our daughter. I wrote one every year on the anniversary. Telling them about my life. Asking for forgiveness. Maybe it's time to send one, I said. She shook her head, a fragile movement. Not yet. I'm not brave enough. But. She took a shaky breath. Maybe I could read one to you. We sat on the floor until the tea went cold and the rain slowed to a tap-tap on the windows. Then, she went to the guest room and returned with a small, lacquered writing box, the kind that holds treasures. She opened it with a tiny key from a chain around her neck. Inside were envelopes, neatly ordered by year, the earliest ones in a youthful script, the later ones in her familiar, elegant hand. She didn't read the first one, or the fifth. She picked one from 7 years ago, 2 years into our marriage. Her voice was barely audible at first, gaining strength as she went. Dear Michael. It's James's birthday today. We went to the coast. He loves the ocean like you loved the mountains. The smell of salt air, the vastness of it. I felt guilty for being happy. Then I felt guilty for feeling guilty. It's a maze with no exit, just walls of shame. I wish you could have met him. I think you would have liked him. He's kind in a steady way, like you were. He fixes things around the house. He remembers anniversaries. He's a good man. I don't know how to love you both. So I love him and I mourn you, and the two things feel like they're tearing me in half. I'm so tired of being halves. I want to be one whole person, but I don't know who that would be. She looked up, her face wet, the letter trembling in her hand. I wrote that the night I came home from your birthday dinner at the seafood place. You asked me if I was okay. I said I was just tired from the drive. I remember, I said quietly. You were quiet on the way home. I thought you had a headache. I had a heartache, she corrected softly. A chronic one. She put the letter back in its envelope, back in the box. I can't do any more tonight. You don't have to. There's no test. She stayed in the guest room that night, and for many nights after. We began, awkwardly and painfully, to build a new marriage, one with a third and fourth presence in the room, acknowledged, spoken to. We drove to Vermont together a month later. She brought the letters. Carol answered the door, and the two women fell into each other on the porch, weeping for 15 years of silence, for the son and husband lost, for the grief that had stretched like a continent between them. They visited the graves together, his, and the small, heartbreaking plaque next to it that Carol had placed years earlier, Baby Vale. Loved, though never held. Elizabeth placed a single white stone on each. On the drive home, as the Green Mountains gave way to highway, Elizabeth reached across the console and took my hand. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she was sorry. She just held my hand, her wedding band, the one I'd given her, pressed against my skin, a cool circle of promise. It was a beginning. Not an ending. Grief doesn't end, it just changes shape. Love doesn't conquer it, it makes space for it. The salt cellar still sits on our kitchen island. I understand it now. It's not from Maine. It's from a craft fair in Stowe, Vermont. Michael bought it for her the weekend they found out she was pregnant. He said a house needed grounding. Her memorial. Her talisman. We don't talk about it. Some truths don't need words. They just need to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be left in the light. Some weights, once shared, become bearable. Not lighter. Just borne together, the load distributed across two sets of shoulders, across a wider, stronger foundation. And that, it turns out, makes all the difference. Subscribe Karma Twin Voices for more.